I have to say, writing this book has been a journey. I actually hate to use that word. It's such a common platitude. You hear it all the time. I think it's overused to the point of being meaningless. But I think it's also the right word. Now, I could call it an odyssey. Webster defines this as an intellectual or spiritual wandering or quest. Now, it's certainly been that. It's been something of a pilgrimage, in part because many aspects touch the sacred. Now, I was certainly intent upon that. A pilgrimage, though, can also mean, at least according to Webster, the course of life on earth. I found this part inescapable. Due to the fact that it's representing a season in my life, I could easily call it a sojourn. That's the formal sense of the word from the late 13th century, when the French sojourner meant to stay or dwell for a time, or the Latin subdiurnere, to spend the day. As a follower of Jesus, I often refer to my life as a weekend away from home, but I think that might be a bit too expansive for this context. Now, it's also been something of an expedition, the primary meaning of which entails a journey or excursion undertaken for a specific purpose. Now, I did set out with a specific purpose in mind, which was to come to a deeper understanding of the collaborative challenges of the human condition as we currently experience them. Life in urban settings produces an odd polarity. On the one hand, we're surrounded by people and vast amounts of stimuli. Life today is like drinking from a fire hose. But on the opposite end of the pole is profound isolation, produced, at least in part, by the inability to process and adapt to the assault on our senses and sensibilities that daily living confronts us with. And I think this helps to explain why addiction and disconnection are becoming ever more rampant. And because it's a technological and cultural phenomenon, it's spreading to less dense rural areas as well. Empathy used to mean the willingness to walk a mile in the other man's shoes. Today, I believe it means we have to walk the miles in each other's shoes. The irony is we have to do this in the face of our strong inclination to avoid it completely. We'd rather text than meet face to face or take a phone call. So it has to be intentional. It has to be deliberate. It requires practice, rigor, and skill. In other words, it has to be sought. Hence the action inferred in the title, Seeking the Nine-Legged Sack Race. I believe the capacity to collaborate and thrive in the complex and dynamic environments of our advanced technological civilization requires a humanity that has to be cultivated. Now back to the expedition part of this. We get the word expedition from the French, expedition, which refers to a military campaign, the act of rapidly setting forth and expediting or implementing a mission. This project certainly, it was my intention to have it be an expedition in that sense, like get it done. Yet as I read and researched, I was constantly presented with ideas that changed my thinking over and over. So in that sense, it could be a series of expeditions along with a few rabbit trails. The Latin adjective diurnus means pertaining to a day or daily. The English word diurnal stems ultimately from this idea. When Latin developed into French, diurnus became a noun, jour, meaning simply day. Bonjour, good day. The medieval French derivative journée meant either day or something done during the day, such as work or travel. Middle English borrowed journée as journey, and in both senses. In modern English, journey, however, now refers to a trip without regard to the amount of time it takes. So, it's been a journey in almost every sense and synonym of that word. It's a journey, and it's a conversation. And in a lot of ways, it feels like I've just gathered like I'm staring through a little pinhole into this huge panorama. And it's a conversation that's really just getting started. Okay, I want to step back for a moment to frame my approach here. I'll start with a question, and perhaps you might see it as the question, or you might just be too busy living and doing to think about it. Don't feel bad, you're not alone. Okay, here it is. Why are we here? Why is there this thing that we call the human experience amidst life on the planet Earth? Now, I know that this is a question philosophers have pored over for literally millennia. Schools of thought delving into this inquiry are as old as recorded language and civilization and probably predated. I want to assure you, I'm not going to attempt to correlate all those different ideas and systems. That's too big a task for any one book, or for that matter, any one man. I do want to share the small stretch of that road I've walked on and what I found along the way. Now, there are many who consider this life to be nothing more than an accident. The fact that we are here is simply the result of unguided natural processes that happen to result in beings like us on a planet like this doing the things that we do. But this doesn't seem to diminish the desire, or perhaps even the need, to endow our human experience with meaning. Meaning that addresses that question, why are we here? And perhaps more from the angle, well, we're here, so what are we going to do about it? And so we need meaning in order to go forward with that. But there are others who believe that the life we experience, was initiated and is sustained on purpose. They believe they're surrounded by the artistry of an intelligence beyond any human comprehension. Yet they too struggle with that same question. Why are we here? As it turns out, both camps are ultimately forced to plant their flags on a hill of uncertainty and get on with living, because there's some answers we just can't get to. So many related questions come up and end up in this category of unknowable. And that's compounded by what we don't know about what we don't know. Now, I reside in the latter camp. What I want to do is share where I've planted my flag and why. Some insights I found particularly helpful in addressing this question, and the ones that logically follow it. Questions like, who am I? Who are you? Who are we together? And what are we going to do with it? And or what are we going to do about it? There are a few basic assumptions I need to be forthcoming about. The first is, I believe that the Earth and all inhabiting it, the solar system, the Milky Way, the other 100 billion plus galaxies that we thus far have observed, are the handiwork of an intelligent designer. Second, the crucial elements of what being human is and how it is best accomplished, I have found rendered in a resource which claims its derivation from that intelligent designer. I'm referring to the Bible. Thirdly, that the man we know as Jesus Christ made the claim, on multiple occasions, that he in fact was, and or for that matter still is, that same intelligent designer. If his claim is true, then it would follow that among the many other things he's done, one of them would be to have coded my DNA, our DNA, mankind's DNA in the most general sense. Now, if this is true, then it follows that he would be better qualified to comment on human well-being and flourishing than any philosopher, think tank, scientist, or politician. This isn't to dismiss or denigrate human contributions or insights. Those are all extremely valuable. Rather, it's to bring into focus that if Jesus is who he claimed to be, then his simple insights and instructions hold a stature of unimaginable importance. Simple doesn't necessarily mean simplistic. E equals mc squared is the simplest of equations, but it holds the key to our understanding of all of existence. Mr. Einstein once commented, if you can't express something simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. Again, if Jesus is who he claimed to be, who could be more likely to comment in the simplest possible terms regarding the nature, purpose, and the best practices for people in his own creation? Fourth, the Bible and the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous have this characteristic in common. Rather than being the work of any one man, they represent the experience, strength, and hope of many people. Now, the Big Book is a collection of real-life experiences which resulted in recovery on a spiritual basis. Similarly, the Bible represents the writings of 40 different authors over 1,800 years in 3 languages occurring on 3 different continents. Each of these writers, in their own way, either by historical reporting or poetic revelation or thoughtful comments on direct experience, provided eyewitness accounts of what happened to them and to those around them. And just as the Big Book portrays spiritual recovery as an artifact of direct experience of freedom from addiction, so the Bible reveals the experience of individuals, families, tribes, and nations with what they understood to be the supernatural source of all life. Fifth, I believe the book of Genesis presents a clear and succinct statement on God's intention for our species, along with a concise description of the human condition in a manner unmatched by any other source. I believe this has a direct bearing on everything we do, both as individuals, families, workplaces, and nations, and any other forms of human assemblages which constitute civilization and which require us to collaborate together toward common ends. finally, on a personal note, I've spent 45 years as a follower of Jesus. Now, the first 15 years, I was what is termed a nominal Christian, or more accurately, probably a carnal Christian. I went to church, went through a lot of the motions, but my spiritual life and understanding was superficial. Though, honestly, at the time, I wasn't aware of this. I thought I was just fine. I was like my parents, who were what I fondly call culinary Jews, which meant they went to temple, they ate Jewish food, did Jewish things, but they had no real concern for what that meant. And even when that shifted for me, in the aftermath of a massive life crash, which included drugs, a divorce, loss of a business, and just about everything else, what I now understand as maturity, or in 12-step parlance, emotional sobriety, frankly, it eluded me. It wasn't until I nearly crashed again due to debt and poor spending habits that I sought out the 12-step rooms. That was the turning point for me. It was the moment in which genuine transformation took hold. That was in 1999. But it puzzled me that I didn't find this kind of recovery and the road to character and spiritual maturity that clearly the Bible and the faith pointed to. Why didn't it happen in church? Most of this I do attribute to my own arrogance and ignorance. But I suspect I was also in good company, and church culture seemed to support those kind of attitudes and that kind of behavior. It was about 10 years ago that it became very clear that the founders of AA were deeply influenced by three spiritual sources: the Sermon on the Mount, the Epistle of James, and the Apostle Paul's description of love in 1 Corinthians 13. Okay, so what's going on here? To be fair, Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religion, despite its spiritual roots. Bill W. never attended church. In fact, he didn't like organized religion. But Dr. Bob and a lot of others, they did. And that's still true today. You have some people who hate organized religion and some people who go to church and everything in between. But why then do the steps and that practicing those spiritual principles, why did it produce in me and in so many others the spiritual fruit that the Bible talks about? What I discovered will be reflected in the structure of this book, which will follow the connections to the walk which Jesus describes in the Sermon on the Mount and practicing the steps and traditions. But it was when I undertook the writing of this book that more was revealed. The reason that the 12 steps works is simple. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, he'll reap. You can't practice pride and get humility. You can't let your self-will run riot in some aspect of your life and expect your life to proceed decently and in order. And as in most human affairs, you can't pray your way out of something you behaved your way into. I thought I knew myself, but I was quite mistaken. Denial is subtle. It lives in the realm of what I am unwilling to know. I found that finally I needed to, as contemporary psychologist Jordan Peterson likes to put it, I need to get to know myself as a stranger. Now, this is still very much an active process, and I hope it's going to remain one. All of that's to say, my faith is much more active, deeper, and more real than it ever was. Even more to the point, the tenets of the sermon and the extrapolated practices of the steps and traditions sync perfectly with the human psyche and emotions. They're aligned to our brain chemistry and our nervous system. They're intrinsic to the very structure of our consciousness. For me, practicing the steps and traditions changed my entire perception of myself, of other people, and the institutions and principles I encountered, that in fact we all encounter every day. I learned to accept life on life's terms, which apparently almost no one does without deliberately choosing to do so. Now, I know that sounds really kind of weird. It seems like being realistic or accepting reality is an obvious thing to do. I mean, why wouldn't you? But it comes as a surprise to everyone I've ever worked with, as well as myself, just how far from reality our minds can take us. One of the prophets observed, "The heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" William James observed that, so far as thinking goes, every thought tends to be part of a personal consciousness. This is foundational to the human experience. It's a bit like a snowflake. Every snowflake looks unmistakably like a snowflake. But upon closer examination, they are wildly varied. No two are alike. And our experience is really the same way. From a distance, we all appear to have so much in common. We go from day to day experiencing life and thinking we understand what's going on around us. Yet, upon truly close examination, and when we compare notes with others, we find that no two of us have anything like the same experience. At best, we can attempt to communicate with each other the narrative we assemble to explain and to adapt to the stream of life we take in. We build common stories, we have shared experiences, and we can agree on those things. Yet in the end, we live on a planet of 8 billion different narratives about life. The sermon gets to the heart of what matters to all of us because of the natural characteristics we do share. It provides benchmarks we can confidently build to, lighthouses to warn of treacherous rocks and shoals, and signposts that say, "Here's the way, walk in it." I believe we live in a breathtakingly beautiful world filled with wonderful things to do, to see, and to be. And it can also be tortuously complex and confusing, full of distractions, dangers, disinformation, outright deceit, and destructive impulses on a global scale unparalleled in human history. Scientists, sociologists, psychologists, and other experts are madly going about trying to find the key to human flourishing and well-being. That well-being is a condition which Jesus' invitation to the kingdom of God is actually referring to. This is a wheel we don't have to reinvent. However, I found I needed to see it with fresh eyes and much deeper understanding. And I think this might be true for a lot of people. The good news is anyone can do it. Anyone can start in that direction and keep going if they want to. Anyone. I would go so far as to say that today, in addition to having a master's degree in some skill or discipline, we need to have a PhD in being human. We need to put in our 10,000 hours in the discipline of our own character and humanity. The even better news is you don't have to be a genius or have lots of money or get a scholarship. You just have to be willing to spend the time and put your entire trust in a power that's greater than yourself. But best of all, you never have to go it alone. Help on every level, divine and human, really are at hand. My hope for this book is that it's going to inspire you to want to seek life and relationships in a way that you may never thought possible. You can experience a prosperous life populated with amazing, loving relationships filled with gratitude and joy wherever you may find yourself today. Because whether you know it or not, you really are right where you're supposed to be. And that's the best place to begin. Now, if you feel you're already there and really enjoying life, that's wonderful. Perhaps you can find some bridges to share what you have more abundantly with those around you who aren't there yet, but who want to join in. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to more talks.